I want to honor everybody's time and, especially Amy, who's got up so early in the morning to be here with us and want us to get started. My dear friend Mark will hold the door as I just open the session and then hand over back. But really, it's just thank you all for being here and welcome to this fourth session, which we call our resource sessions. And just by seeing this circle today, I can sense that this is a conversation that's waiting to happen, and one that many of us maybe have been carrying quietly with ourselves as well. So, for those of you who are joining us here for the first time, I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name is Amrita Singh, and I'm the founder of Back to Source Coaching. And through my work as a leadership coach and working with executives from across the world, what I've always noticed is this yearning to slow down, to reconnect, to engage with inner work that allows organizations to be more humane, more conscious, and more alive. And at one end is that yearning, and the other end is that courage. So, can we really make this happen? And so these resource sessions are our way to give voice to that yearning. They're part of a larger um, project that we call Soulful Organizations, an invitation to reimagine the workplace as a space where inner development and outer impact can meet. And what began as a conversation with a few friends, many of them who are here today as well, and fellow seekers, has quietly grown into this wider circle that is willing to explore leadership more than just a role and more like a way of being, right? And so I welcome you all to these sessions with us. Today's session is called Cultivating a Soulful Inner Ground, and it feels especially meaningful to me. I first encountered Amy Fox through a podcast where she spoke about love as a business imperative. And something in the way she spoke just made me like, held me in my tracks. And from there, I just couldn't help noticing her work. And then I went on to YouTube and one podcast after the other, one video after the other, many of her conversations, her video series that she so generously shares that, she runs and offers through Next Practice and Mobius Leadership. Just kept listening, and kept listening on. And as I listened and I watched, I felt like I wanted to reach out to her and share with her what a big impact it's had on me and her way of being, just her clarity, her courage. And I think something about her
I think
grounded
let me
tenderness
introduce myself. So
that
I'm
really
Chris,
spoke to
a
me.
function of couples here, and today
Thank you. And so I found myself like dipping into her wisdom again. And so I actually just reached out to her on LinkedIn and shared about what we are offering through Soulful Organizations and the resource sessions. And what followed from then was just a few exchanges, very few. And her generosity said, "Of course, I'll be there." And here she is. But I actually met with Amy just 2 days ago. And it was our first meeting. We were only exchanging some conversations on LinkedIn. And that first meeting felt like a continuation of an older conversation. And as I sat with it, it felt maybe from a different lifetime, even though it was our first meeting. And just the sense of ease and re connection, the recognition just affirmed something really important for me. And that was that Amy really embodies what she teaches. So it's my huge honor to welcome Amy Fox to the Resource Circle. And thank you so much for accepting our invitation. And she's really the founder, like I said, and the CEO of Mobius Executive Leadership. She's a core faculty member at the Next Practice Institute. And for nearly 2 decades, she has worked with senior leaders and leadership teams across the globe. Yeah. Nice. That was a nice signal for across the globe. And supporting them to navigate complexity with greater presence, trust, and most of all, coherence. And what makes Amy's work so powerful is that she integrates this inner development, systems thinking, as well as trauma-informed practice. And you'll get to hear more from her today, just to help leaders understand their inner soil can be sustainable so that human cultures can grow. And her work calls out to leaders to move beyond just performance and control into my favorite space of love and integrity and relational depth as core leadership practices. So today, Amy will be speaking, like I said, about cultivating a soulful inner ground and exploring these inner conditions that allow leadership to and organizations to truly bloom and flourish. And this conversation will be anchored by someone very dear to me, my friend and spiritual partner, Mark van der Linden. Thank you, Mark, for also stepping in. And he is the founder of Being at Full Potential, that's based in Switzerland. And he spent many years accompanying leaders on this path of inner awakening and embodied leadership. His presence, you will note, carries depth and sensitivity, clarity, and quiet steadiness, qualities that really allow conversations like this to unfold with grace and care. And it feels special to have Mark holding this dialogue today and, holding this space with a sense of curiosity, safety, and emergence for all of us. So I'll take a pause and invite you to settle into your seats, maybe soften your breath, and just allow yourself to arrive fully so that this conversation meets you exactly where you are. So with that, I'll just hand over to Mark to take it forth. And my greatest gratitude to all of you and to Amy for being here. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you so much, Amrita. What a beautiful introduction. And really excited to dive in, Amy, and start this conversation. Just for everyone, we have 90 minutes. So 60 minutes will be in dialogue with Amy, and then there'll be 30 minutes for Q&A. So if anything comes up for you during the conversation, just take note of it, put it in the chat, and we'll try to get to it in the last 30 minutes. So thank you for pinning Amy and myself, Amrita. So I think right now, am I only visible or is Amy also visible? Okay, here we go.
I think we're both there.
There we are. Lovely. So yeah, very warm welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much.
I know it's very early for you. I think it's 6
I'm
a.m.
delighted to be here.
Boston.
I'm really delighted.
So cultivating an inner, a soulful inner ground. So maybe the first question to ask you is, how is your inner ground this morning?
I mean, I think maybe worth defining what inner ground is, and then I'll answer the question.
Sure.
I think of inner ground as the degree to which, in any given moment, I'm in emotional self-contact, that I have a sense of what's flowing through my heart, that I have a sense of being connected to the numinous or something wider than myself, and that I have an open field of relational exchange being available so that I can be touched by other people and I can extend my own field to reach for other people. What I noticed this morning is my utter joy listening to Amrita frame this conversation, because she frames it very, very close to my own orientation to what this is really about. So it's very touching to me. And also just as she said, the excitement that I feel about a global movement for more love in business and more healing in business. And whenever we gather to make this conversation explicit and collective, I think it's another pebble in the path to this being a real lived possibility around the world. So it's very exciting. And I'm very much looking forward to our conversation and to the Q&A afterwards to hear what everyone's up to.
Thank you.
How about you?
Yeah, thank you so much for already defining the inner ground. And I think the words and the way you described it is probably a soulful inner ground, right? Is there a distinction between inner ground and soulful inner ground?
I think the soulful inner ground takes it one step further, which is to say a leader that is interested in the well-being of the people around them, the humanization of the workplace, and the desire to serve life. So the addition of the word soulful for me starts to represent somebody who's moved from being purely self-oriented and um, invested in their own meaning making to somebody who's looking to contribute to the larger fabric of life. Um, and I think more and more leaders are hitting that threshold where they want their life to be consecrated to something greater and to be of service.
To be of service. Indeed, I
Organization,
recognize that as
yeah, to
sorry.
have a greater sense of purpose and a greater sense of alignment to something.
Yeah, thank you. I think a lot of us feel that
Mm,
that there's this awakening within ourselves, but there's also something about the environment, the conditions, the world today that is inviting this deeper, soulful way of engaging with it. Um, could you speak a little bit about that? How do you see the environment today, the conditions, and why is soulful inner ground cultivating that perhaps more
yeah,
important today than it ever has been?
I think there's a both a opportunity and an evolutionary pressure that people are responding to. So the evolutionary pressure is what, you know, people refer to as increasing complexity or increasing chaos. So when things feel fundamentally fragile and existentially threatened, either in terms of employment or large scale adaptive challenges or climate change and AI transformation and the polycrisis, all of the sort of ecosystem of impingement that we're facing now, people are in an increasing level of threat and fear. And I think in that destabilization process, there's a very strong mandate, even requirement to cultivate a kind of what Amrita called coherence or tranquility or equanimity and inner strength that isn't perturbed by outer movement, that has an
Mm,
anchor in stillness and spaciousness. Because without that, we're just going to be reactive and thrown from thing to thing without a sort of sense of an anchor or a North Star. So I think that people, as they are increasingly stressed and anxious, and things are increasingly hard to fathom or plan, there's going to be more of a understanding of the importance of cultivating a wisdom and intuition, a mindfulness, many of these qualities that we've all been talking about in the field of transformation for quite some time. So that's the pressure. I think the opportunity is that many people are just called to start exploring themselves into a process of healing and a process of greater wholeness and freedom. Most of our organizational culture is built on a very technical model, industrial model of the workplace, which is largely analytic and intellectual. It's anti-body, it's anti-emotion, it's anti-relation, puts a strong emphasis on autonomy and resilience rather than interdependence and belonging. And in some sense, it's anti-spirit. It's very Cartesian. So I
mm,
think the opportunity is to reinvigorate and reanimate our workplaces to be places of joy, places of belonging, places of celebration, places of real community, of joint purpose. So I think there's also something that's emergent, particularly as different generations come into the workplace and have a different view towards what work and life are. I
mm.
think we have the possibility of re-envisioning how organizations function and what they provide us to make it far more wholesome.
Wow. Yeah, I love that. So there's sort of an external aspect to the evolution, and there's an internal
Yeah.
desire, yearning.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yearning's a lovely
Yeah.
word. I think we're yearning for each other.
Yeah, it's like a coming home, right? It's like we've been disconnected from what's always been there, our connection to self, our connection to spirit. Uh, and that it's almost like within all of this complexity and confusion, the only way of knowing is in the coming home and reconnecting with our own North Star, if you like, or our own truth and our own intuition.
Yeah, and just to extend that logic for a minute, Mark, I think everybody on the phone has been to meetings where people are going through the motions and sharing ideas, but not really listening to each other, not very present, not very synergistic in what's growing between them. And have also been to meetings where people are deeply listening to each other and feel really available to each other and are ideating together. And the sum of the parts of that collective intelligence are producing really fresh ideas and breakthrough
Mm.
possibilities. So it's not just a matter of sort of emotionally coming home, although I think that's beautiful what you said. I think it's also a matter of learning how to convene ourselves in ways that are genuinely generative.
Mm.
And I don't think any business is going to be leading the frontier of their industry absent conversations that really harvest multi-stakeholder information, expertise, ideas, because the situation as it gets more complex, it means the information is dispersed throughout the system, and we need to start listening at the margins, and we need to start looking for um, parallel contexts that might have fresh ideas for us. So there's also a sense of widening our perceptive field and our receptivity to be impacted by other people's ideas, to become more curious and more open to persuasion. I think that's also a critical part of it.
Wow. Yeah, great. Love that. And we'll circle back to that one once
Mm.
we enter into the organizational space and
Mm.
we'll talk a bit more about some of the practices there. But before we go there, could you share a little bit about um, your practices, Amy? How do you cultivate this soulful inner ground on a daily basis? Do you have
Oh, I
anything you would
probably
like to
would be
share?
exaggerating if I said I did it on a daily basis because I run an organization that has lots of people in it and lots of activity, and I don't want to overstate it, but eh, I would say a couple things. It's a wonderfully generous question. One is I do meditate on a daily basis and I do chant on a daily basis. So I do practices that are designed to cultivate um, more awareness and more centeredness on the one hand, and more devotion and open-heartedness on the other hand. And I think of both of those as fundamental to how I want to show up. And so your practices ideally are tied to what are the inner states that you're cultivating and that you want to have be part of your presence.
Mm.
Um, a second thing that I do ongoingly is I keep track of the birthdays of all 300 practitioners inside of Mobius and all of our closest clients, and send individual birthday notes copied to each of the people that everybody, the person whose birthday it is close to, as a way to just signal the importance of commemorating and witnessing and celebrating each other's milestones. It sounds like a small gesture, but it signals, I think, a wider sense of abiding connection. Um, a third thing that I do is take real retreats very regularly. I think it's important to be both in the marketplace and to have occasions in which you pull out and you really go deeply inward. So at least on a quarterly basis, I'm in a 10-day retreat. I have active relationships with multiple spiritual teachers that are precious to me, that give me guidance and give me supervision and give me confrontation and give me encouragement. Um, and I think being led by somebody who you feel is more mature than you and can help stretch your capacities is also a very important, and of course a wonderful blessing when you find it. So maybe that's just a few to name.
Mm. Thank you. Yeah, and it feels very choiceful and very deliberate. Um, based on, like you say, how you want to show up, the presence you
Mm.
want to have with others, and the things that are important to you, and therefore you want to also show that level of care to others. When you work with leaders, do you how do you have a process in which they become clear on what their practices are, and how they can, because I guess there's not a one size fits all, right? Can you share a little bit about
Yeah,
that?
that's a wonderful question. I'm going to answer it in two parts. How do you open up the possibility that there is a path and a practice to even consider? And how do you help somebody curate what their practices might be? Um, so, in terms of the first one, uh, I think a leadership program that touches people has certain things intrinsic in its design. One thing is it's going to operate at a much slower pace than the frenetic pace of daily life and work life. So there's much in our leadership programs. We speak more slowly, we move more slowly, we give a lot more white space for open conversation. We journal and reflect. We take time to walk in nature and metabolize what's arising emotionally. We take time with cello meditations. We paint, we do poetry, we use the expressive arts, or what my friend David White calls the poetics, as a way to inspire and expand
Mm.
somebody's consciousness, somebody's thinking, somebody's emotional range. Um, and we invite a level of self disclosure that's not typical of the workplace. So we invite people to share their life narratives, their emotional experience, their fears, their hopes and aspirations and dreams, what we might think of as intimate personal content. We invite all of that into the boardroom or into the conference room. So we're trying to demystify the notion that personal and professional have to be so divorced. Um,
Mhm.
and when you do all that, people very naturally make the shift. Um, they arrive often in a state of exhaustion and, in some cases, depletion. And it doesn't take more than 72 hours of giving people rest, a little bit of renewal, a lot of emotional connection, a lot of inspiration, to watch
Mm.
people make the shift into a lot of joy, a lot of emotion, a lot of collaboration with each other, a lot of kindness to each other. Instead of shaking each other's hands, they start to pat each other on the back and hug each other. Instead of answering questions with a one-word answer, they start to share stories and anecdotes and things that matter to them. So I think the initial shift requires a very purposefully crafted context and a very securely professionally held container. And then the move is very simple and very easy and very natural. Um, we don't like operating behind these big shields and walls. It's not organic to who we are. So the minute you have permission and structure to choose something else, almost everyone does choose something else.
Yeah.
The other nuance to your question, Mark, is how does somebody find the practices that are right for them? In some ways, I think it's trial and error for all of us. In the same way that we try what foods work for us, or what movies work for us, or what sports work for us. I think on the path you pick something to start with, and you see if it resonates, and then my own belief is that metaphysically, once you're a walking invitation for spirit to guide you, spirit can find lots of different ways to communicate and to reach you. And a friend will hand you a book, or someone else will tell you about a course, or like Amrita was describing, you'll hear a podcast that touches you. I very rarely worry about people not finding their way to the next step. I think the importance for us as coaches and facilitators is just pointing to the path.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Yeah. The messages are always there.
Mm,
Um, and it's our capacity to see them and to say yes to them. I think
yeah.
that is often, maybe a little bit challenging at times. And to trust that, there's a message here that is meaningful. But thank you. And I very much relate to how I say simple because or how easy it is for people to get to that place of joy and that place of um, allowing their full selves to express it, to express. And you spoke about the structure and permission, and I very much like that. Is simply giving permission and creating a safe environment where it's like, okay, I'm not going to feel judged. It's not going to, um, yeah, that you're safe. And
Can I just
I've
build on
all,
one thing you said? Can I build on one thing you said for a minute, Mark?
yeah.
You were linking safety with not feeling judged. And I think I just wanted to double click on that because there's a really sophisticated understanding inside of that, which is anything that shows up in a classroom, in a workplace, in a family, where somebody is acting in a way that's destructive or less productive, or what sometimes is called executive derailers. A sophisticated facilitator will look at that and realize they're looking at an early childhood survival strategy, which once upon a time was the wisest and best thing that child could do. And so you bring to that survival strategy not judgment or assessment or condemnation, but tenderness and the deepest compassion. And honestly, reverence to acknowledge that once upon a time, how you're acting right now, arrogant, oppositional, defensive, cynical, that was life saving once upon a time. Because if it isn't healthy and wholesome, it's traumatized behavior.
Mm,
And I think that's more than not judgment. That's like the compassion of understanding how cycles of violence repeat themselves and
mm,
how people protect themselves when their emotional experience is overwhelming or beyond what they can process when they're young. And
mm,
I think one of the great secrets in corporate life is that most of us, unless we've turned our attention inward to heal, are operating out of antiquated and um, earlier childhood behavioral strategies, family roles, family dynamics that then just get repeated as team dynamics.
mm,
That's why I believe that you can't, inner work is not discretionary, because if you want to have genuinely creative and um, extraordinary team outputs, you have to help people to operate from their own most mature and productive behaviors. And that's a
mm,
healing path by definition.
mm. So when you see that arise in a group setting and you recognize that there's pain there, that there is sort of early life stories that have served in the past but
Mm.
may not be serving anymore. Can you share a little bit about how do you hold space for that in the moment?
Well, there's a range of choices or sort of, and maybe I would say, criteria that would dictate the choice you make. If the group has already been together for 4 or 5 days and there's a great degree of trust and safety, you might in the moment simply call the person's attention to how they're impacting people in the room and to noticing what it is that is what's arising in them that's causing them to protect themselves or where they felt threat or where they felt unsafe. But
Mhm,
most likely, you're getting the information in the group setting because you have a wonderful chance to observe people in real time and you're coaching them privately because you also don't want to risk exposing anybody or shaming anybody. So you can gather the data from the group process and then work on it privately and more deeply in a one-on-one session, which is pretty typically what we do. But
got it. Yeah.
sometimes, for example, I'm thinking of a person who spoke in a way that was very, very cheery and superficial and high pitched and disconnected. And at one point, I stopped her and I said, just try to say one thing from deep in your body. And we tried for almost 45 minutes until she could say a sentence that was laden with her being, that was
Mm,
permeated with her emotion, that was deeply connected to things she felt or wanted or thought. Because she was so used to a performative approach to interacting that it took it a while for it to melt. But that's a
Mm,
permanent sea change. Once she finds that place inside herself, that ground will never go back. Um,
mm,
and of course, having the privilege to witness her make that journey inward, inward, from being way 10 feet outside of her body to being located inside her own uh, heart, um, is an invitation for everyone to make their version of that journey.
mm.
So, one of the beautiful benefits of doing group work, as you know, because you run leadership programs, is that everybody's working all the time. And I think that field of coherence is what expedites the healing and the learning. It's an amazing thing to watch a group of people commit to walking with each other for a few days in a meaningful way because they spark each other. The learning and the wisdom comes from the group always,
Yeah,
reliably. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it is wonderful. Yeah, it's almost like what starts off as a multitude of conversations, it slowly becomes one conversation, one
Ah, that's
coherent
beautiful.
conversation. Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing to say. That's right.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So I think if it's okay, I'd like to sort of shift into a bit more. I think we're already getting into the organizational space, but just sort of
Sure.
move a bit more into that. Uh, how do you how do you bring this work to organizations that are not quite ready for it yet? They need it, they don't know they need it yet.
Mm.
And the importance of language in that.
Yeah, I think those of us that are interested in the themes of love in business, of increasing relationality, of transformational intelligence, uh, are well served to have a variety of language systems and some fluidity between how we talk about the work. I think most organizations recognize the business mandates that are uh, that require this kind of work, even if they don't necessarily yet connect the dots of what it's going to take to get there. So if you say to almost any R&D organization, you need to create psychological safety, they understand that. They're working hard at it already. But they may not yet understand that to create real safety is to create real trust, is to create real intimacy, is to create healing. Um, or another example would be organizations know they want inclusion, but they may not know yet that means you have to prepare people to hear each other's hearts. It means you have to open people's minds to very divergent points of view and perspectives and help the organization become receptive to new ideas and not frozen in time. So I think the most essential opening is to be able to language the business needs to which this kind of work is responsive.
Mm,
It's also, I wouldn't want to overstate it. There are other ways to develop skills and there are other ways to shift mindsets. You can do it through coaching. You can do it through a team exploration and adventure. Like this is just one way, but it is a very potent way, and it is a very impactful way to go at trying to embody those kinds of adaptive capacities. And I
mm,
think the question of how to convince people this is necessary is going to slowly disappear over the next couple of years because I
mm,
think people are already feeling so overwhelmed
mm,
and so confused, by the current circumstances. And if I may say, a little bit heartsick by the level of cruelty and violence that we're seeing escalate.
mm,
That I think there's almost no way that people aren't going to be asking for how do I cultivate a quality of care? How do I cultivate a quality of kindness, of forgiveness, um,
mm.
of real connection, of
Yeah,
real conversation. I think it's going to become an urgent matter of any business that wants to do good and wants to co-create.
yeah, yeah.
But I'm really curious what people will tell us when we're done with the conversation. I'll love to hear, get a little
Yeah,
bit of a pulse check about where this conversation really is. Yeah.
absolutely. We'll do that. So at the very beginning, you spoke about evolutionary pressure.
Mm,
It feels like that same idea is coming back here again when you said,
mm,
very soon we're not going to have to convince people anymore. It will be a need that they recognize, that they can articulate, that they
mm.
are seeking for because of this need, right? This evolutionary pressure that is real. Does
Yeah.
that, because it's
I
a
mean,
new
I think,
concept for me, evolutionary pressure, but I really like it and I'm trying to use it. Is that
yeah,
appropriate?
you're using it beautifully. I mean, I could describe it this way. 25 years ago in the field of organizational development, all we talked about was behavioral change. You're doing X, you really should do Y. And then we discovered that people could learn to do Y, but then when the stress was really significant, they would revert to X. So we started to understand that you had to understand, go deeper than just substituting one behavior for the other. You had to go and explore what Chris Ardress called their frame, what McKinsey called their mindset, what some people have called their motivational drivers. You had to go and look at how they're thinking, the paradigm they're using, the mental model that they're using to choose the behavior. And that was the state of the field for a number of years. And then my friend Danny Goleman wrote a book about emotional intelligence. And he started to introduce the notion that you had to go beyond the intellectual in order to understand why people were behaving the way they were behaving. You had to also understand the emotional. And I think what we're seeing now is the cusp of a movement towards spiritual intelligence and a much deeper understanding of even the feelings conversation. Because when I started Mobius 20 years ago, I never could use the word trauma. I wouldn't have. I would have been doing that kind of work, but I wouldn't have described it explicitly. And now I think people are starting to understand, in part because it's playing out geopolitically, that we have generations of untreated, unaddressed trauma in the cultural fabric and in the collective consciousness that is showing up as a repetition of conflict and a repetition of harm. And I do a trauma screening before all of my leadership programs, at least the deeper ones. And very rarely do you meet somebody whose life has not been touched in some way by trauma. And I don't mean trauma as a like large, scary word. I just mean experiences that they weren't capable of processing
Mm,
or absences of developmental support that they needed.
mm.
So I'll just give some examples, Mark, so we all know what we're talking about.
Please, yeah.
I'm talking about families that grew up in poverty, families that had forced migration, children that were raised in a place where there was a war going on and had exposure to high levels of violence, families that had an illness or the death of a parent or the death, God forbid, of a child, families that sent their child too early to boarding school where the child didn't really have the proper level of holding, families where the grandparents were in World War II, the parents were raised without enough holding and love and attunement, and then when you get to the next generation, you have a family that's numb and cold and where the kids really don't feel seen or celebrated or welcomed in their beauty. Um, you have alcoholism, you have drug addiction. Uh, I mean, there's just racism, colonialism. There's many, many, many examples. And the after effects of all of that is a level of numbness and an inability to hold our inner experience um, that has to be addressed if we're going to
Mm,
revitalize people and liberate them to be their full potential.
mm,
So that's where I think the conversation is headed, is to
mm,
a better understanding that many, many leaders, some part of the time, are making choices from their own fear or their own regressive habits. And it's very possible and very doable to have that shift.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah. No, it takes me back to that question around how do you help people understand the benefits of this work? And I think part of what I'm hearing here is the ability to connect dots, deeper
Mm,
dots. So if you want inclusion, yeah, there is the surface level work you can do, but there is also the deeper work, and that is becoming more and more important to acknowledge. But we have to help our clients understand the the connection, the connection points, right? We have to kind of hold their hand to say, like, yes, actually, if we want our teams to show up differently, then there is a healing part. There is a forgiveness aspect
yeah,
there. There is a
yeah,
personal journey. And
yeah.
here's why, right? And I think examples like you share are super helpful for people to understand that because it's not that obvious um, to
It
make
is
those
when it
connections.
is when you watch it, like in the leadership programs,
Sure. Yeah,
when they witness one another make these breakthroughs, there's a quality of
definitely.
admiration and solidarity and beauty that happens very spontaneously. I'm just thinking of another story since you talked about the importance of stories. One of the executives who took one of my programs was a very high performer, very, very commercially savvy, very capable, wonderful guy. And for 20 years, he had gotten feedback systematically on an annual basis that, as amazing as he was and as entrepreneurial as he was and as much followership as he created, people didn't feel connected to him. They didn't feel a sense of trust from him. They didn't feel he was open. They didn't feel cared about, and that was having a demotivating effect on the teams. And he got all sorts of tactical advice. Take the team out to a baseball game, take the team out to a drinks, uh, host whatever, all nonsense. And he did all those things and it had no effect. And he came to my program, and over the course of the week, he did some very profound inner work. And on the last night, he stood up and grabbed a flip chart. It touches me so much. And he drew a lockbox with a heart inside it. And he said, I came to realize this week that when my brother died when I was a child, I put
Mm,
my heart in this box and
mm,
I've kept it locked there for 40 years. Until I came to this program and touched my grief, there was no possibility that I could be a loving man or a loving father or a loving leader.
wow.
And now I can't help it.
Wow.
And it was very beautiful. And it was very still in the room. You could just feel the profundity of what he was saying and the truth of what he was saying. And and that's partly why I described there's no going back. Like that
Mm,
grief has been touched, it's been metabolized, it's been attended to, and he's going to be able to do something he couldn't do before, no matter how much he tried.
mm.
And I have story on story. I have so many
I
stories like that.
yeah.
Yeah,
I, I,
and it only takes a few days. That's what's so beautiful.
mm. I love this story, Amy, because it sort of speaks to this next question I was going to ask you about
Mm,
this how do you bring this deep inner work, which is very personal, at scale, right? How does it scale? And part of the insight I'm just getting now is that it scales through stories, or
mhm,
that stories is one way in which it scales, because you just told a story of one individual. And I think all of us could feel it in our bodies. At least I could,
mm,
and it moves something. And so can you speak a little bit about this scaling and maybe the ripple of an individual coming to
mm,
some personal breakthrough and how
mhm.
that energetically maybe shifts something in the organization?
Yeah. I mean, I think two things. I think there's a magnetic effect to anybody who makes this kind of a shift. They go
Mhm.
back and lead in a different way. They go back and interact in a different way. It's very, very visible to the people around them and palpable and very inviting. And one of the things people report to me is that when they come back from a program like this, people start spontaneously confiding in them far more. And
Mhm.
of course, that's true because they're a very different walking invitation to what they can receive and what they can hear and what they want to know. Um, and so I think there's a natural ripple effect to each person's magnetism as a result of this. But I also think part of the answer, Mark, to your question is that all of us have to get very creative and thoughtful about what organizational mechanisms make it more likely that people will interact in this way. So one of the ideas I've been musing with for about 6 months is a thing I'm calling nesting. So
Mm,
when you join a company, you get assigned to a nest, which is like a home community or an affinity group. It's a peer coaching group that meets once a month, and its only purpose is to be an intimate repository for what's going on in your life in the workplace.
mm,
And the nest throws celebrations for important occasions. If you lost your parent, the nest would meet and sit for an hour and listen to stories about your mother or your father and look at pictures with you. It would become a harbor in which you could unveil yourself. And it could meet at lunch. It doesn't even have to take time out of the business, but it has to be something the business cares to ensure is there. And so I've been innovating a whole bunch of practices that are really about infusing a village into a company. And I think we could be much more thoughtful about how that happens. We're operating
mm,
in, I think the real pandemic of our time is loneliness, and that
mm,
we're operating in far too much isolation when we thrive in connection.
mm,
So that's at least part of the answer to your question. I think that leader
mm,
can come back and structurally create
mm,
innovative practices that help the company to become more loving.
mm. You know, this links really beautifully to a question that was brought up from one of the people who are on the call right now,
Mm,
and who leads a community of practice on mindfulness in a large company.
mm,
And they're I think there's a group of 8 or 10 of them. So please feel free to continue to ask, when we have the Q&A. But one of the questions was how to maximize, or how to make these types of initiatives even more impactful, because it sounds a little bit similar to what a nesting initiative could be.
yes.
Uh, could you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for your effort. I think it's an incredibly important thing for organizations to be creating centers of mindfulness and practice and contemplation. And I think it's even more powerful when people sit together because they create a field that has its own power and potency. So my first response is thank you. I think a second thing is to think of yourselves as a coherent field that can serve different functions. Um, so, for example, to offer yourself as a source of prayer for people in the company who might be ill, and to say, we're going to meditate in the service of so and so's sick brother, and to make yourselves available to the other employees as a resource, because we know when people sit like that, that there's a natural connection to influence the unfolding of circumstances. So that's one thought. Um, a second thought would be looking for, together, looking for teachings that relate to mindfulness, not just as a meditative practice, but as a set of precepts for how you live a mindful life, and to study those together to deepen the ethical implications of what you're doing, not just the energetic implications. So, for example, to study right speech or to study right action, um, and to use the mindfulness sessions to also be in an active investigation of what does it mean to create a more ethical organization and a more ethical and aligned world. That would be another thing that would be interesting. And the third thing I could think of is reaching out to other centers of meditation and mindfulness in other companies and seeing if you can't create a like regional sitting practice where some of you are sitting in one company and some of you are sitting in another company, and you start to perceive and know yourselves as a larger movement of love, which maybe will inspire more people to join, and I think encourage more people to do what you're doing, which I think is incredibly important. Um, and that's at least spontaneously what I think of.
Super, super. Thank you, Amy. And
Mm,
um, one of the things, and I believe you you've used these words of best practice and next
Mm,
practice.
mm,
And I feel like a lot of the things we've been talking about are sort of next practice,
mm.
but maybe you can clarify the distinction there and why next practices are so, uh, again, important in the conditions that we're living in today.
Sure. Let me first say what I mean by the two terms, and then I'll try to
Mm,
respond to your question more. So I've had the great privilege of, over the last 30 years, studying with many of the seminal thought leaders in the fields of organizational development and adult development. Ron Heifetz's work on adaptive leadership, Chris Argyris's work on action science, Linda Hill's work on innovation, Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy and Jennifer Garvey Berger's work on adult development, Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety, Peter Senge's work on organizational learning. I could go on. These are all my wonderful mentors and friends. And that canon I consider best practice. And I think we need all of those tools and all of those ideas in order to create a really high performing workplace. I think everything they've talked about for the last 30 years for most organizations is still the frontier of their culture. For example, Harvard Law School published a book 25 years ago written by Bruce Patton, Doug Stone, and Sheila Heen that I taught for many years on difficult conversations. Most organizations I go into are still not having the difficult conversations that they have other than at the water cooler. So equipping people with the skills and the orientation for creating real organizational learning and to benefit from experimentation and iteration and dialogue, those things are still critical, but they're necessary and insufficient to meet the complexity that we're facing now. And so I believe now we need an additional set of tools that I call next practices, which are practices of embodiment, practices of relational attunement and co-regulation, practices of genuine teaming, and practices of healing. And that's, of course, what we've been talking about so far. Um, but I think that organizations that are going to be exceptional are going to be those that teach the best practices and evolve themselves to be operating from next practices.
mm. So from high performing to exceptional organizations.
I think, yeah, I mean, I haven't thought about this. I think high performing and high sensitivity,
Mm,
high sensing, because we really will need intuitive knowledge and the ability to be guided in order to make any sense of the complexity that's before us. And I think if we're operating from just our own cognitive capacity instead of our enormous ability to be perceptive, receptive, and in service to something that is unified, um,
mm,
we're going to be lost.
mm,
So ultimately, I think we're talking about organizations that have a sensitivity to the unity.
mm. Could that also be something for a community of practice, mindfulness community of practice, to sort of be that channel for the organization, at least in the
Uh,
beginning until
my
it.
supposition is that any community of practice that's pausing to get quiet has an enormous asset in that organization because they have a higher level of coherence, they have a higher level of deep listening, they have a higher level of stability and inner quiet, they have a higher level of uh, self-reflection and self-awareness. I mean, there's so many resources that are cultivated by spending time in silence and time in silence in a group that I absolutely think they are by definition contributing all those things to the organization just by definition. And if they become purposeful about that, for example, at the end of a mindfulness session, if everybody would just check in, what's one intuition that came to you, or what's
Mm,
one insight that came to you, then you start to cohere those into real resource
mm.
and reconnaissance for the organization. That'd be
Yeah,
very thrilling.
yeah, yeah, the intentionality of that. Yeah, wow. We've covered quite a lot of ground here.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, let's maybe start to conclude our exchange here, Amy.
wonderful.
Um, is there anything you would like to share in terms of advice? I don't know, advice maybe, or invitation to the group?
Well, I think one is be bold and try things. We're all at the frontier of this conversation. Anybody that tells you they have the answers isn't in the experiment. None of us have the answers. It's really wonderful to gather and encourage ourselves to be in the experiment. So I think the first thing I would say is try.
Mm,
And the second thing I would say is share what you're learning. You know, being part of a supervision group, being part of workshops, being part of conversations like this, that it's wonderful. And it's the way that I come to articulate what I think and hear other people put language to what they're doing. And it helps refine me quite a bit. So that's the second thing. I maybe I'll mention that I have a book coming out next month called Leading in Chaos, which I co-authored with my friend Nicholas Johnny, which we very much hope will contribute to this conversation and be an opportunity for to give more framing to some of these ideas. And I'll love to hear from you. I'm on LinkedIn. I respond to everything, so feel free to write me if you're interested. Thank you, Amrita. So, but yeah, let's open up the floor for questions. I'd love to hear what's on people's minds.
cool. Before we do that, there's one last thing that maybe you can speak to, and that is the IDGs and
Mm.
the program that you're launching in collaboration with the IDGs. So
So
could you
Mobius has
share?
the privilege of hosting a year-long transformational leadership training with our partners at the Inner Development Goals. A bunch of Mobius senior experts are presenting workshops online and taking questions Q&A to keep iterating and fertilizing this dialogue. So it's on the website of IDG. Please feel free to join us if that's of interest. They're enrolling now. I think the first session is next week or the week after. So it's definitely not too late to join, and we'd love to have you. Yeah.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for that, Mark.
Yeah, and I'm just putting the link
Oh,
in the
great.
chat. So
Thank
if
you.
anyone wants to check that out, and if there's any questions on inner development goals, what it is, feel free to reach out afterwards. I'm very happy to share a bit more about that. So
Wonderful.
thank you, Amy. Really, I just loved the flow, and thank you for sharing so much of your um, wisdom with
It's a
us,
privilege. It's a
and
privilege.
the authentic stories and your journey and all of that. It's been wonderful.
Mhm.
So let's have a look at what is coming up for people here. So feel free to unmute. I'm going to go through the comments now, just very quickly, but anyone who wants to unmute and jump in, please feel free to do so.
I think there's a question from Shilpa and a question from Ruchira that's there in the chat box, but it'll be nice to have your voice in and you share it yourself instead of me reading it. Shilpa?
Thanks, Amrita. Thank you so much, Amy, Mark. It was almost like I wanted to scribble every word, but that's not possible. I had this question around trauma, and thank you so much for talking about it. To this day, I've not had the courage, I'm an HR professional, to bring the word trauma into workplace.
Yeah.
But I think the first thing that you sort of hit is there's very little awareness around one's own trauma. Um, then how do you begin? What is the first step to bring that awareness around with the leaders that we work with? You see them acting in a certain way every single day, maybe lashing out at people, knowing very well that they shouldn't, but where do you begin?
It's a beautiful question, Chip, but let me give you my first thoughts and hope that they're helpful. Um, I think I wouldn't bring the word trauma into somebody who's either resistant or defensive or too scared to look, but I think you can absolutely talk about reactive behavior, um, and the cost of that reactive behavior to the people around them, but also to themselves. And you can talk about triggers. and what are the contexts in which they get derailed or knocked off balance and start to act in less productive ways. The leadership circle assessment is particularly good at giving people data of where they're acting reactively, because it systematically assesses through 60-degree interviews creative response and reactive response. Um, and so I think you can use an assessment tool or direct feedback to get somebody some behavioral input about what's happening. And you yourself, Shilpa, if you do the debrief with an eye towards, let's look at some of the real root causes of this, or let's look at what's really going on at the moment that this happens. Do you find yourself feeling anxious? Do you find yourself feeling trapped? Do you find yourself feeling embarrassed? What would you say is going on emotionally? That becomes a doorway potentially to a deeper, earlier exploration of the antecedents of that reactive habit. So that's how I would typically go at it. Um, I think the other option is to invite a session in which the whole team would give each other live, real-time feedback. One thing you do that has me trust you, and one thing that would have me trust you more, or something like that. You frame it all positively, but you make it clear that the invitation is to talk about what isn't working. Um, that's a second possibility. And the third possibility that I've sometimes done with teams is to, in the middle of a difficult conversation, hand out yellow stickies and ask everybody to write anonymously the emotional impact the conversation is having on them and one thing they're thinking that they wouldn't dare say. And you put it on two walls, and you have the team gallery walk the two walls, and then you ask them to sit back down and process what they saw. So it's a forcing mechanism to give people the right to say, actually, the way Mark's speaking is difficult for me. I'm sorry, Mark, I just picked your name because you were there. And it's shutting me down. But without the high heat of actually looking Mark in the eye and offering him the feedback directly. So those are just some of the mechanisms. Is that responsive for now?
Very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's a great example of the importance of language and meeting people where they're at. I think the reactive behavior, it's a very sort of non-threatening way of inviting into the deeper root cause exploration. So
Yeah, and
that's
you can also do a very simple team session on the neuroscience of the amygdala hijack, right? We all have wired into us a part of our brain that shuts down our thinking function and our choiceful function and moves us into survival patterns. Um, and uh, and those survival patterns are operational in a team meeting inevitably, and it's useful to know about them. There's a
yeah.
wonderful book by my friend Michelle Brody called Own Your Armor that uses very neutral language to talk about team dynamics and defense patterns. And you can have everybody read the book and then talk about it. And that's a super neutral, super unthreatening, extremely useful conversation.
Wow.
Thank you for the question. I'm hoping 5 years from now, we won't have to dance around it quite so much.
Thank you so much, Amy and Mark. And yeah, I think this conversation, other than being deeply insightful, is so reassuring just to
Mm.
hear you say, and it just validates so much. And Amy, my question was that this kind of deep work also requires a longer term engagement,
Mm.
and we don't always see that happen. So, what are some ways in which we could inspire organizations to commit over a longer range?
I have a three-part answer. Earlier this week, McKinsey put forward a piece on LinkedIn that said they had come to the conclusion that it was really important to give their consultants more than 2 hours a year of training. They really recommended 2 days a year of training. And I laughed out loud for the longest time because it's absurd, really. This kind of work, vertical development, real development, requires not necessarily an endless amount of commitment, but a few days offline because it takes a day or two to decompress and step back from your normal way of operating, and it takes a day or two to do the deeper work. So we normally, at least in Mobius, if we're not doing a skills training, but we're doing real leadership development, we ask for 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. But an enormous amount, a breathtaking amount can happen in 3 days, 4 days, or 5 days. So that's the good news. It's not 10 weeks of boot camp. It's a very purposeful, very well led, very well guided, immersive experience. And you're right, Ruchira, it needs some follow up support. My experience is that can be done lots of different ways. It can be done within the organization by peer circles. It can be done by training HR professionals and how to coach people. It can be done through continued study. It can be done through a mindfulness group. There's lots of ways to support what happens after the immersion. I'm not of the belief that people need endless hand-holding, because I really do believe that once somebody has made this shift, their whole life becomes a reinforcing mechanism. They'll talk to their kids differently. They'll have different family conversations. Their relationship with their EA will change. I mean, et cetera, et cetera. I don't need to iterate it. But I think the heart of your question, if I reiterate it in my own language, is how do we help companies to understand that taking the time is not discretionary, and that giving this real time and real intention is a turbocharge to everything that they care about from a business perspective. And that, I do think, is the campaign we're all on right now. Everything is getting, in my experience, more transactional, more narrow, more immediately outcome based in terms of what are you going to do for the bottom line. And this is a counter trend to that. This is really saying, what's your long-term investment in the health, well-being, and flourishing of your people? And I believe that that will come back tenfold, but we have to prove the case that the ROI is everything we hope for. Is that responsive for now, Ruchir?
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for the question. Anybody else?
So there's a few more in the chat here. Eric, I don't know if you want to speak to this, but the idea of nests resonates. I'm thinking how it could fit during a transformation effort, a place space to check in small groups, how you're experiencing change, process, make meaning, etc. So it sounds like that was a bit of an aha. Is there a question that you have as well, Eric? Feel free to jump in.
No, it's more sharing of insight. I think, often I have a change effort coming up, and have been thinking about things in terms of, like, having the leader of teams check in and help people process and then feed that up. But then I think this idea of nests helps me think about creating maybe, new non-hierarchical structural groups, that cut across the organization and can be safe spaces to create meaning. And I like that pure intent that you had, around it. And in the context of a change, maybe it's something, just like, processing the experience, taking ownership of the change in a constructive way, taking care of each other through the change. So that just sharing of an insight in a different application. So thank you.
That's beautiful, Eric. And that's a natural extension of the idea I was sharing. Maybe just to expand what you're saying one notch further, my vision of a nest is serving the function of a check-in and a sort of keeping track of how, for example, large-scale change processes are occurring for people, but that a nest would also serve some purposeful, ritualized functions for the belonging in the organization. So when somebody would join, they would share with the nest their life story, and there would be at least some people in the company who really know them very well, know what hardships they've faced, know what they care about, know what shaped them. That the nest would be a place you could bring significant life events from your personal life into visibility inside the organization. So just to expand slightly the notion that the nest is a place to do check-ins, which is always beautiful, whether it's in a meeting or in a group or, in an after action review, all of that. I agree with you completely. And I think there are some missing functions that one could serve through the nest idea, that might lead to a lot more sense of closeness in people's work life, which is what I'm aspiring to have it be. So I just to build it out a little bit.
Thank you. Then there's two questions that I think are a little bit related. So Sumita and Pragya, uh, the connection I see in your questions are how do you handle situations where, myself as an individual in an organization, I feel a real calling to show up differently. I'm tuning into the power of mindfulness, etc.
Mm.
And the environment I'm in is really operating at a very different frequency and not understanding it, pushing it back, saying it doesn't belong here, etc. So that there's such a disconnect that it's like how do you even build a bridge? Um,
Yeah. I mean, I think there are things that one can do to invite people to play your game, to use that language. You can find people that sort of seem more receptive and more open and invite them to a special session that you construct. You could do something as simple as a round of, if you knew me, you would know about me. If you really knew me, you would know about me. If you really, really knew me, you would know about me, and go around 3 times. And at the end of those 3 times, everybody in the room will know each other a lot better. I don't mean to be glib, but I think there are ways that you can create pockets of tenderness and connection and warmth, pretty easily. And if people elect to come, I think they're likely to be up for trying. And I think it's also fair to say that if you are open-hearted and wanting to be inside an organization that operates this way, at some point you might assess that your context is too hostile or too resistant to this way of operating, and that you need to change context. And I think that's a very personal judgment call when you feel like you've tried as much as you want to try, and when you really feel like defeated. But I know you shouldn't compromise what you're aspiring to.
mm,
So if it feels like you can't aspire to it where you are, go somewhere else.
mhm, yeah. And there's a question around measurement from Deepa.
Ah, my favorite question.
Yeah. So what role does measurement play in adoption of transformational work?
Through AI, we're going to start to have more easy ways to measure and show the behavioral shift that happens when these kinds of fundamental shifts in being take place. Because you're going to have AI that can look at team dynamics and diagnose who's hearing each other, who's contributing, who's speaking in a calm voice. You're going to get real time feedback on the team dynamics in a way that we haven't had before, other than by process observers, which is far more subjective. So in a few years, as AI is starting to do more and more team consulting and team process coaching, I think it's going to be extremely easy to measure the impact of this kind of thing. Right now, it's a little nebulous, if I'm honest. It's not that easy, other than anecdotally. But I can tell you that the organizations that choose to make this kind of an investment in people development make it over and over and over again, because they see
Mm,
that it does have bottom line business impact, it does have bottom line cultural impact, and it does have bottom line performance impact. So you have to be willing to take a leap of faith for a little while until it starts to become a movement inside your organization that's visible at some scale. But it's not endlessly long, and it's usually pretty palpable. Um, for me, how I assess impact is, I watch the group come in on Sunday night, and they're tired and they're formal and they're exchanging in very routinized ways. And on Thursday night, they're hugging each other and they're dancing together and they're singing together. And there's an enormous amount of joy in the room. And I think this was a good week.
Mhm.
It almost always makes me cry. It's a
Mhm.
beautiful thing to watch people melt.
I love this. I love that. And for me, it's very insightful what you said about the AI, down the road, not too far down the road, being able to pick up real-time data and summarize that and feed that back. And it's super
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I'm a little bit in that space of measurement myself. So I'll definitely take that one with me. And,
Yeah.
um, when you were talking about the need for these 3 days. How do you relate to this in the IDG? Oh,
Matilda has a hand raised, Mark.
okay. Yeah, please. I'm just going through the comments, but Matilda, please jump in.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Amy. Like everything you're saying, my soul resonates so much. And I know a number of friends here resonate so much with what you're sharing.
Thank you.
You told us be bold, and
Mm.
I hear you. I really hear this. It really lands on me. I'm curious in your stories, in your way, like what have been your ways to be bold? Like I'm eager to hear one or two stories, so to have a bit more, like maybe encouragement for us to be bolder.
That's a great question. Um, when I started Mobius, which was in 2005, the trend was exactly as it is now, right? Very recently, make everything shorter. The 2-day training on difficult conversations, that's great, but what could you do in a day? The 1-day training, that's great, but what could you do in a brown bag lunch? I mean, everything was more and more derivative. And I honestly felt like God did not put me on this earth to do entertainment. Like that, this is not the work of my life. So I started the company with my sister, Erica Ariel Fox, to run an experiment. Would there be a few clients who wanted to go counter trend and really do work that mattered and touched people at their core and was genuinely transformative? And it became a kind of miracle story. I mean, 20 years later, it's a global firm with very significant prestigious partnerships and a quite extraordinary book of business with Fortune 500 companies. But I didn't know that at the beginning. So, in some sense, there's just being willing to follow your heart. And sometimes that's a moment by moment choice of saying something more bold and naked than common society would bless. And sometimes it's a choice to share something very personal that you wouldn't necessarily share in a professional setting. I talk a lot about some of the struggles I've had in my own inner journey when I lead a program. So there's all micro choices that have to do with boldness, and there's ambition choices that, where you work and where you offer your gifts and how you frame what the offer is that can have to do with boldness. But I think mostly it has to do with believing this is a natural human yearning, and to remind yourself that no matter how buttoned up and hardened the person in front of you appears, you can always speak to the tenderest part of them. And that if that's what's in your heart as you're speaking, that part of them will hear you. And I learned a wonderful thing from my energy teacher, Linda Cicera. She said, if somebody's in a group that you're leading and they're there to develop at a soul level, you belong to them forever. And it completely changed how I facilitate, because I knew she was right. If I'm asking somebody to go to their most fragile parts of their psyche in my custodianship, that's a forever commitment. That means 10 years later, if they're in trouble, I have to be available. And I operate that way. And because it lives for me that way, people do often come back to me years later after they took my programs. And it's nothing that I'm explicit about. It's not like I say on the last day, here's my email, you can call me in 20 years. It's just a tacit vow I made and a promise that I'm making implicitly that's palpable to them. So I think the thing that maybe I'm finding myself saying in response to your beautiful question is the boldness is making your offer true in the subtle realms and not just the explicit realms. And when it lives also as an energetic commitment and an energetic invitation, that's the most powerful possibility. I want to share one more story that I think is touching. Somebody went through a year-long program that I guided early on in Mobius. And this guide appeared to be very unmoved by the program. He wasn't oppositional, he wasn't difficult, he wasn't disruptive, he wasn't problematic in any way. He just didn't seem like a lot was happening for him, which is extremely unusual. I mean, these programs are powerful, and most people's shifts are very visible and very immediate. So I noticed him and I remembered him, of course, like what was going on for that guy? Almost 10 years after he took the program, he called me and he said, can I talk to you? And I said, of course. He said, do you remember me? And I said, of course. And he said, I want to apologize because when I took your program, I was very closed and I was very walled off and shut down, and I really couldn't hear a lot of what you were saying. And I said, no problem. You weren't, it was lovely to have you. It wasn't a problem. And he said, but this year my family had a tragedy, which I'll leave confidential. And when the tragedy happened, everything that you had said rushed back to me. And I want to come take the course again because I think I could hear you now. And it was so touching, so touching. And it taught me, I think, an important lesson about the boldness question, which is don't assume you can see what somebody's receiving, because sometimes it takes a long time for it to ripen. So you keep going even if it looks like they're not hearing you. Not in a way that's unresponsive or unattuned to the group field, but just to have the confidence that sometimes these invitations are meeting a great deal of pain and a tragedy that somebody has lived. And you have to trust the process of its unfolding in them in the right time. Is that responsive to your question? It's such a wonderful question.
It is more than responsive, and I love how the size of your heart is amazing. Thank you.
Can I jump in with a question? Because I don't know how to raise my hand as a host.
Please.
Yeah, and Amy, my question to you is that as you make this bold invitation to, what we refer to maybe as a higher level of consciousness, right? And the tendency then is for the group to like look up to you as you are making that invitation, right? And so my question is, I don't know whether it's a best practice or next practice, but how do you stay in that realm of unity consciousness as you make that invitation?
Oh, what a gorgeous question. It causes me to want to first bow to my teachers. So I have the great joy of working with and studying with Thomas Hubel and Patrick Connor and Shai Tubali and Linda Cicera. So one way is to constantly remember you're also a student and to put yourself in context in which you are learning and being guided. And I think that's an essential thing to do as a practitioner, including supervision groups and looking at places where you might be in your own shadow or blind spot. I think the second thing is really trusting the richness of group interaction as the driving force for healing. I don't think it's a series of dyadic interactions between me as the facilitator and group member A and group member B and group member C. I think the real beauty happens amongst them. So everything in the design of a program is focused on creating that group field. There's something really funny that happens at the end of the program. Almost always on the last day, everybody says, this was such an amazing group. Like this program, it just wouldn't have been the same without this particular group. And the faculty always laugh to each other because that's the group the week before said that and the group the week after that said that. But if they think they've done it, then it actually worked. That's far more satisfying to me than them saying, wow, Amy's really amazing. Because if it's Amy's really amazing, it won't replicate. But if it's this group was trustworthy and safe, they have a likelihood to go back and recreate it in their workplace because they've expanded what they believe a group can be, and a variety of people can be trustworthy. And that's where the gold is. And I guess the last thing is my own devotional practice in a way, Amrita, that I see myself as an instrument of life, and I offer myself that way, and then it's not very personal, and I'm not drawing a lot of attention to myself, I hope. And it's just, I think that's true. I think any words of wisdom that any of us have to offer are gifts of grace that we've received to express. And it's just more metaphysically accurate to say it's not me. It's not a posture, it's just the truth. So I hope that's responsive.
Extremely, thank you.
Very, very nice. Yeah. So we'll take maybe one more question, Marvin, and then we can start to wrap up for today.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Amy. Thanks very much. Talking about the various levels of consciousness and the possibility of something existing at those various levels at the same time, the word gratitude was in my mind. The word gratitude, and if you allow me just not to talk about now, just not the moment now, though yes, in general terms. Sometimes to the external, I would be grateful. Like me, I was a Boy Scout, so I'm grateful to the institution, to scouting in general, but that thing that exists. And sometimes I would be grateful to that person for that word at that moment. And then on the other side, going inside, I feel grateful for, I don't know, it could be because my parents made me.
Grateful to life.
It would exist at the same time, and another a different level. Some people would refer to God, let's say, as an external element. We refer to God as above institution. I'd refer it to as life inside. So you could feel gratitude for that exists inside.
I think that's a gorgeous ending, Marvin. Let us end on a note of gratitude to one another and to our hearts and to the divine as it flows through us. May everyone really have a moment where we can all remember this life is a blessing and the blessing of being together this morning. So thank you for that. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Amrita, would you like to say a few closing words?
That I'll only just say is that from the space of, our project of Soulful Organizations, what I'm taking is that if we can just infuse the village in the organization, it will automatically become a soulful organization. So, thank you for bringing, I took love as a business imperative from our first conversation, evolutionary pressure from the second, and now this infusing this village. So, thank you for always expanding my perceptivity through your wisdom and your clarity. But thank you so much for the courage to do this work and bring this work in the world. And of course, thank you, Mark, for holding this space and so effortlessly and gracefully and,
Yes, thank you, Mark.
holding it all together so well. And
wonderful dialogue.
And for everyone for like showing up from different parts of the world. If I know it resonates here in the world that we go out into, we will build that space together. So I really appreciate it. And
Thank you,
so
Amrita.
much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Have a blessed day.
All the best. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye bye.